A family is denied a pre-booked airport shuttle by a driver who judges them on sight. He smirks as he tells them his bus is full, leaving them standing in the cold rain. But the driver doesn't know who he's talking to. He doesn't know that the man he just insulted holds the fate of his entire company in his hands. And he has no idea about the vehicle that is pulling up to the curb right behind him. Get ready for a story of shocking disrespect and instantaneous, life-changing karma. You won't believe what happens next. The faint whine of the engine's shifting pitch was the only signal. After 8 hours cocooned in the sterile luxury of Delta One, the real world was asserting itself. James Hartson glanced out the window of the 767, watching the flaps deploy as the grey, rain-slicked landscape of Queens, New York, rose up to meet them. Beside him, his wife, Dr. Eleanor Hartson, closed her book. She was a woman whose elegance seemed to be an innate quality, not an applied one. Even after a transatlantic flight, her cashmere travel wrap was draped perfectly, her expression composed. "Landed," she said quietly. "Good. I detest that moment of hanging in the air." "Everyone detests it, Mom," came a voice from the seat behind them. Olivia, 16 and already possessing her mother's sharp intellect and her father's unyielding gaze, was unplugging her noise-cancelling headphones. "It's literally called controlled falling." "Well, I'm glad the control held," James murmured, a small smile touching his lips. He unbuckled his belt, the click sounding unnaturally loud. He stretched, his 6.2 frame unfolding in the generous space of the pod. James Hartson was a man who inhabited his custom-tailored suits with the same ease he wore this simple, dark grey travel tracksuit. He was a senior managing director at the Carlyle Group, one of the world's largest private equity firms. His face, often seen in the glossy pages of the Financial Times or Forbes, was known for its placid, almost academic calm. It was a calmness that had famously unnerved rivals across boardroom tables, a calmness that masked a mind that moved like a predatory shark. "Daddy, did you check on Apollo?" James looked at his son. Marcus, 10 years old, was already wrestling his small, specialized carry-on from the overhead bin. It wasn't a suitcase. It was a half-sized cello case, built for travel. "Apollo is fine, Marcus. He was stowed safely." "The flight attendant promised," Marcus muttered, his small brow furrowed with the immense responsibility only a 10-year-old musician can feel. The plane docked at JFK's Terminal 4 with a gentle bump. The business-class cabin disembarked first, the Hartsons blending seamlessly with the other executives and wealthy travelers. They moved with the practiced, unhurried pace of people for whom airports were a second home. The terminal itself was a familiar brand of chaos, a cacophony of languages, the squeal of luggage wheels on polished floors, the overly bright glare of duty-free shops. They cleared immigration with the ease of global entry, their 4 black, hard-shell Rimowa suitcases appearing on the carousel almost immediately. "All right, team," James said, stacking the last bag on their smart trolley. "Our car isn't due for another 15 minutes. The travel agent also booked us on the 7:30 p.m. CityLink Premier shuttle as a contingency. It's supposed to be right outside. It's cold and raining. Let's just grab the shuttle. It'll be faster." Eleanor nodded, pulling her coat tighter. "Good call. I just want to get to the peninsula." Olivia groaned. "A shuttle? Dad, really?" "It's a Premier shuttle, Liv," James said, pushing the trolley toward the ground transportation signs. "It's just a glorified Sprinter van. We'll be the only ones on it." They pushed through the heavy glass doors and into the damp, chilly reality of a New York evening. The air smelled of jet fuel and wet concrete. The orchestrated chaos of the terminal was replaced by the raw, noisy anarchy of the pickup lanes. Taxis honked, police whistles shrieked, and a cold, persistent drizzle began to intensify, misting their faces. They found the designated hotel and private shuttles area, a long, covered concrete island. A white Mercedes Sprinter van was parked there, its engine idling. The side was emblazoned with a sleek, blue logo, CityLink Premier. The driver, a man in his late 50s, was standing just outside the van, checking a paper list on a clipboard. His blue uniform was rumpled, his face set in a permanent, sour expression. His name tag read, Gary. As the Hartsons approached, Gary didn't look up. He was busy yelling at a cab driver who had strayed too close to his zone. "Hey, hack! This ain't the taxi line! Move it!" James waited patiently for a moment before speaking. "Excuse me. CityLink Premier?" Gary finished his glare at the cab, then turned his attention to James. His eyes did a quick, dismissive scan. A black family. Travel-weary, in tracksuits. He saw Marcus's cello case, and his expression soured even further. "Yeah, this is it," Gary grunted, his thumb jerking toward the van. "Prepaid premium service only." The implication was clear. This probably isn't for you. James Hartson, a man who managed a $30 billion portfolio, simply nodded. "That's correct. We're the Hartson party, 4 of us, for the peninsula." Gary let out a small, disbelieving snort. He looked down at his clipboard, running a thick finger down the paper. "Hartson? Hartson. Nope. Don't see it." "Perhaps you could check again," Eleanor asked, her voice polite but firm. "Hartson. It was booked through our corporate travel account." Gary's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing at Eleanor. "I know how to spell, lady. And I know my manifest. I've got a Harrison for 2, but they're not till 8 p.m. I don't have a Hartson." He looked past them, into the rain. "This shuttle is leaving in 2 minutes, and it's full." James glanced through the tinted windows of the Sprinter. He could clearly see at least 10 empty seats. The van was, by any definition, mostly empty. "Sir," James said, his voice dropping half an octave, the first sign of his patience wearing thin. "The van is clearly not full, and I have the confirmation right here on my phone." He pulled out his iPhone 16 Pro, the screen glowing in the dusk. "Confirmation 881G, booked via the Carlyle Group." Gary Wilson recoiled, as if the phone had been thrust in his face, though James was holding it at his own chest. "Hey, don't shove that thing at me," he barked. "I don't care what your little email says. My paper manifest is what matters. The company's digital stuff is always glitching. If you're not on my paper, you're not on my bus." He physically turned his body, positioning himself between James and the shuttle's open door. "Now, if you'll excuse me, you're blocking my pickup area. The general taxi stand is down that way. Or you can try the public bus." He pointed a finger toward the far end of the terminal, where a crowded, lumbering Q10 bus was belching diesel fumes into the rain. The moment hung in the air, thick and toxic. The drizzle was getting heavier, and the wind whipped it under the meager shelter of the concrete overhang. Marcus, instinctively, held his cello case tighter to his chest, his small face etched with confusion. He'd never seen an adult speak to his father that way. Olivia, however, was not confused. She was incandescent with rage. "He's lying," she said, her voice sharp. "Dad, he's lying. We saw the empty seats. He just doesn't want us on the bus." Gary's head swiveled toward her. "You watch your mouth, little lady. I don't need this hassle. I'm on a schedule. This bus is for premium clients, not for people trying to scam a free ride." "Scam?" Eleanor's voice was no longer polite. It was ice. "We are not scamming anything. We have a valid, prepaid reservation. I am showing you the confirmation number. And I'm telling you, it ain't valid if it ain't on my list." Gary slapped his clipboard for emphasis. "I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm not letting you on. My manifest is full. End of story. This was a blatant, demonstrable lie. The few passengers already on the bus, a white couple in their 60s and a businessman, were now staring, their faces blank. "Sir," James said, and his voice was now so calm, so devoid of emotion, that Eleanor recognized it as his most dangerous state. "You have two choices. You can check our confirmation number on whatever system you have, or you can call your supervisor. But we are not moving." "Oh, you're not moving?" Gary laughed, a short, ugly bark. "You think you're tough? I'll call the Port Authority police. That's who I'll call. Get you arrested for trespassing. How'd you like that? A night in the holding cell at JFK? He pulled a chunky radio from his belt. "That's it. I'm calling it in. Harassment of an employee, attempting to board without a ticket." "Go ahead," James said, crossing his arms. "Call them. We'll wait." James knew this game. It was a power play, one he'd seen in boardrooms, though in a more polished form. The man was counting on them to back down, to be intimidated, to want to avoid a scene. Gary had profiled them as a family that would crumble under the threat of authority. He had miscalculated on a colossal scale. Just then, a middle-aged white couple, the man in a loud golf shirt and the woman in bright pink, hurried up, dragging their own luggage. "Hi. Miller, party of two?" the man asked breathlessly. Gary's entire demeanor transformed. A sickeningly broad smile split his face. "Mr. Miller, right on time, absolutely. Let me get those bags for you. We've been waiting for you." He eagerly grabbed their suitcases, ignoring the Hartsons completely, and tossed them into the rear luggage compartment. "Right this way, sir." "Mum, watch your step." Olivia made a sound of pure disgust. "You have got to be kidding me." As the Millers boarded, Mr. Miller paused on the step and looked back at the Hartsons. He looked at Gary, then at James, and then said, with a tone of impatient superiority, "Folks, you're holding up the bus. If the man says it's full, it's full. Why don't you just move along?" Gary nodded vigorously. "See? Some people get it. Now, get out of the way." He made a shooing motion with his hands. It was that gesture, the dismissive, shooing gesture, as if they were stray animals, that finally broke through James's control, not to anger, but to action. "Olivia," James said, his voice quiet, "start recording." Olivia's phone was in her hand in a second, the red dot on. "Already am, Dad." Gary's face purpled. "What? You can't film me. That's illegal. I'll have you arrested for that too." He lunged forward, not at James, but at Olivia, his hand raised to swat the phone away. James moved with a speed that belied his calm. He didn't touch Gary. He simply interposed his own body, a solid, immovable wall between the driver and his daughter. Gary, lunging, found his hand coming not toward a teenage girl, but toward the chest of a man who was 6 inches taller and radiating pure cold fury. "You will never," James said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to shake the air. "Put your hand near my daughter again. Do you understand me?" Gary stumbled back, his bravado instantly evaporating, replaced by the coward's panic. You can't threaten me." "I didn't threaten you," James said. "I made you a promise. Now, you will call your supervisor, or I will." "Gary, what is going on out here?" A new voice cut through the tense standoff. A woman in a crisp matching CityLink Premier uniform, holding a tablet, was walking briskly from the terminal. She had a supervisor's name tag, Sarah Jenkins. "Sarah, thank God," Gary blustered, trying to regain his footing. "This family is harassing me. They're trying to force their way onto my bus. They don't have a reservation, and now they're filming me and threatening me." Sarah Jenkins looked at the scene. Gary, red-faced and panting. James, standing like a statue, his daughter half hidden behind him, phone still raised. Eleanor, her face a mask of contempt, and Marcus, who was trying very hard not to cry. She sighed, a not this again expression flashing across her face. "Sir," she said to James, "I'm the supervisor. What seems to be the problem?" "The problem," Eleanor said, stepping forward, "is your employee. He has refused to check our valid, prepaid confirmation. He has lied, claiming the bus is full, and then allowed other passengers to board. He has insulted us, and he just attempted to physically strike my daughter." Sarah's eyes widened. "Gary, did you lunge at this girl?" "No, I was telling her to stop filming. It's my right to privacy." "You're in a public-facing job on airport property, Gary. You have no expectation of privacy," Sarah snapped, her patience clearly gone. She turned to Eleanor. "Ma'am, may I see the confirmation?" Eleanor handed her the phone. Sarah's eyes scanned the screen. "Confirmation 881G, Hartson," she murmured. She tapped the number into her own tablet. And just as she did, as the rain began to fall in earnest, a vehicle glided to the curb, so silent and so black that it seemed to absorb the light around it. It slid to a stop directly in front of the CityLink shuttle, blocking it completely. It was not a taxi. It was not a shuttle. It was a 2025 Mercedes Maybach S680, a $250,000 beacon of opulent power, its three-pointed star gleaming like a jewel in the gloom. Gary Wilson just stared, his mouth open. For a full 10 seconds, nobody moved. The only sound was the idling engine of Gary's shuttle, the hum of the Maybach, and the drumming of the rain. The back door of the Maybach opened, but not from the inside. A man in a flawless, charcoal grey suit emerged from the driver's side. He was tall, thin, and wore the kind of professional impassivity that made him look more like a Secret Service agent than a driver. He held a small, black umbrella, which he opened with a quiet snick. He then walked, not to the passenger door, but to the trunk, which opened with a silent, hydraulic hiss. He turned and his eyes scanned the curb. They passed over Gary, over Sarah, and landed on James. A flicker of recognition. He walked directly to the Hartson family, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the wet pavement. He stopped a respectful 3 feet away and bowed his head slightly. "Mr. Hartson, my apologies for the delay." His voice was cultured, with a faint British accent. "The traffic on the Van Wyck Expressway was more congested than our service anticipated. I trust your flight was comfortable." Gary Wilson's jaw was now, quite literally, on his chest. His eyes darted from the Maybach to James and back again. The scammer in the tracksuit was being addressed as Mr. Hartson by a man who looked like he belonged in a James Bond film. James, his entire demeanor shifting from defender to executive, gave a slight nod. "Arthur, good to see you. No problem at all. The flight was fine. We were just clarifying our shuttle options." "Indeed, sir," Arthur said, his eyes flicking to the CityLink van with a look of profound disinterest. "Shall I take your luggage?" "Please," James said. Arthur began efficiently and gracefully, transferring the Rimowa suitcases from the trolley to the velvet-lined trunk of the Maybach. He handled Marcus's cello case as if it were a priceless relic. "Master Marcus," he said, "I'll place Apollo right here in the front passenger seat, where it's climate-controlled." Marcus, who hadn't spoken a word, gave Arthur a brilliant, relieved smile. "Thank you, Arthur." Meanwhile, Sarah Jenkins, the supervisor, was looking at her tablet. Her face had gone from professionally annoyed to chalk white. She had tapped in the confirmation number, 881G, and the full reservation had appeared. Client, Hartson, James, party of 4. Act, Carlisle Global Exec, Priority 1. Pickup, 1930, CityLink, 44B, Contingency. Primary, Maybach VIP Alpha. Driver, A. Wells. Notes, VIP flag. Do not delay. Client is MNG, Dare Global Investment. She looked up from the screen, her gaze finding Gary's. It was a look of such abject horror and fury that Gary actually took a step back. "Gary," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What did you do?" "What?" he stammered. "I told you they weren't on the list. Hartson, it wasn't there." "It is here, Gary," she said, thrusting the tablet at him. "It's right here. Carlisle Global Exec. Priority 1. VIP flag." The colour drained from Gary's face. He knew what Priority 1 meant. It meant the booking was tied to one of Trans Global Logistics, their parent company's billion-dollar corporate accounts. It meant, do not, under any circumstances, mess this up. Mr. Miller, the man in the golf shirt, was now hanging out the door of the shuttle, his jaw also slack. "What in the... is that a Maybach?" Arthur had opened the rear door of the sedan. The interior glowed, a cavern of quilted cream-coloured leather and polished wood. "Mrs. Hartson," Arthur said, holding the umbrella over her. Eleanor, without a single glance back at Gary or Sarah, inclined her head and slid into the car. Olivia went next, pausing only to aim her phone camera directly at Gary's stunned face for one last, perfect shot before disappearing inside. Marcus scrambled in after her. James was the last. He paused at the door. He turned and looked at the 2 CityLink employees. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't issue a threat. He didn't need to. He simply looked at Gary Wilson, held his gaze for 3 long, devastating seconds, and then looked at Sarah. "You should know," he said, his voice quiet but carrying with absolute clarity, "that your employee, Gary, refused to check our confirmation. He called us scammers. He lied about the bus being full, and he put his hand toward my daughter." Sarah was trembling. "Mr. Hartson, sir, on behalf of CityLink, I am so deeply sorry. This is a terminable offense. This is not our standard." James held up a single, placating hand. It was not a gesture of forgiveness. It was a gesture to stop talking. "The standard," James said, "is what happens when you're not here to supervise. This is your standard." He looked back at Gary, who was sweating through his uniform despite the cold. "You should have just checked the list, Gary. It would have been so much easier." James Hartson then slid into the back of the Maybach. Arthur closed the door. It shut with the silent, airtight thunk of a bank vault. The Maybach pulled away from the curb, its smooth, powerful engine barely a whisper. It sprayed a small sheet of water from a puddle onto Gary's legs as it merged effortlessly into the traffic. Gary Wilson was left standing on the curb, his paper manifest getting damp in the rain. He looked at the empty space where the Maybach had been. He looked at the half-full shuttle. He looked at Mr. Miller staring at him. Then he looked at Sarah. She was already on her radio. "Dispatch, I need security at the T4 shuttle stop. I have an employee for immediate escort." She turned to Gary, her face carved from stone. "Gary Wilson, give me your badge. Give me your clipboard. You are suspended, effective immediately. We are going to the HR office right now. You are done. You are so done." The contrast inside the Maybach was jarring. The chaotic, diesel-fumed, rain-lashed world of the JFK curb was gone, replaced by a tomb-like, leather-scented silence. The only sound was the faint hiss of the climate control and the whisper-quiet click of the windshield wipers, which seemed impossibly far away. Marcus was already exploring the rear console, his fingers tracing the controls for the heated and massaging seats. "Whoa, This is way better than the shuttle. Olivia was texting, her fingers flying. I'm sending the video to Aunt Chloe. She's going to lose her mind. Eleanor leaned her head back against the plush headrest and closed her eyes, taking her first deep, truly relaxed breath since they'd landed. James, she murmured. I need a very, very large glass of wine. The peninsula will provide, James said. He was looking out the window, not at the passing landscape of the Belt Parkway, but at his own reflection. His face was placid again, the mask of the executive firmly back in place. But his eyes were cold. Dad, that was insane, Olivia said, finally looking up from her phone. That guy, Gary, he was a total racist, right? That's what that was. James didn't answer immediately. He watched a plane take off in the distance, its lights climbing into the dark, wet sky. Yes, he said finally. It was. But it was more than that. It was lazy. It was arrogant. He saw us. He made a calculation that we were not important, that we had no power, and that hassling us was easier than doing his job. Well, he calculated wrong, Olivia muttered, a grim smile on her face. Epic fail. He did, James agreed. But people like that, Liv. They exist everywhere. They're gatekeepers. They have a tiny amount of power, and they use it to feel big by making others feel small. You'll meet them your whole life. So what happens now? Olivia asked. That supervisor, Sarah, she said he was suspended. Is that it? He just gets a slap on the wrist and does it to someone else tomorrow? Someone who doesn't have an Arthur and a Maybach waiting for them? This was the question that hung in the air. It was the question that bothered James the most. The Hartsons were insulated. They were fine. But what about the family that came after them? The one that didn't have a corporate account? The one that did just save up for a premium shuttle ride, only to be turned away and humiliated by a man like Gary? No, honey, James said. That is not it. He took out his own phone. He wasn't drafting a complaint to CityLink's customer service. He wasn't posting a video to social media. He was operating on a different level. His fingers tapped out a short, precise email. 2. Linda Bates, LeBatesCarlisle.com. CC, Carlisle Global Travel Dept. Subject, Urgent, Service Incident, Trans Global Logistics, CityLink. Linda, please be advised of a significant service failure tonight at JFK T4. The family and I were denied passage on a pre-booked, prepaid CityLink Premier Shuttle, Conf 881G, by an employee named Gary Wilson, Shuttle 44B. The employee was openly hostile, refused to check our reservation, and claimed the bus was full, which was verifiably false. He was discriminatory and, most alarmingly, physically aggressive toward Olivia when she attempted to record the incident. This service is not secure. The professional standard is non-existent. Action. 1. Terminate our domestic ground transport contract with CityLink and its parent, Trans Global Logistics, effective immediately. Cite breach of contract due to discriminatory and unsafe practices. 2. I am scheduled to speak at the Global Investment Summit tomorrow. I believe David Miller, CEO of Trans Global, is attending. Please have his invitation to my keynote and the subsequent private dinner revoked. His firm is no longer a partner. 3. Contact our legal team. I want a full review of our global logistics contract with Trans Global. I suspect their systemic issues run deeper than one driver. We are fine. We are en route to the peninsula now. But I want this handled before we sit down for dinner. Regards, J.H. He hit send. The email, which had taken him 90 seconds to write, shot from the moving car to the Carlisle Group's servers. Within 30 seconds, it would be on the screen of Linda Bates, his executive assistant, a woman legendary for her terrifying efficiency. Within 5 minutes, the entire corporate travel department would be mobilizing. "So," James said, putting his phone away and turning to his wife. "A large glass of wine, you said? I think I'll join you." "Arthur," he said, pressing the intercom button. "Yes, Mr. Hartson." Arthur's voice was immediate. "Is the champagne in the cooler chilled?" "But of course, sir." Veuve Clicquot. "Please," James said. "Open it." He was done thinking about Gary Wilson. He had excised the man from his life with a single email. But for Gary Wilson, the world was just beginning to end. Sarah Jenkins marched Gary Wilson into the drab, windowless HR office behind the CityLink check-in counters. Her hands were shaking, either from rage or from fear. Gary was blustering, trying to build his defense. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered as Sarah slammed the door. "That guy threatened me. He and his bratty kid. I'm the victim here, Sarah. I'm going to file a grievance with the union." "Shut up, Gary, just shut up," Sarah whispered, her eyes fixed on her tablet. She was logged into the main system, and the red flags were multiplying. The Carlyle Global Exec account was flashing with alerts. Service failure. Client contacted. Legal review flagged. "You know who that was?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "I don't know. Some rich guy. How was I supposed to know? He was in a tracksuit. You want me to be a mind reader?" "That rich guy," Sarah said, reading from the account profile, "was James Hartson. He is a senior managing director at the Carlyle Group. He personally manages their entire European and African investment portfolio. He's not just a client, Gary. He is the client." Gary's face went blank. What does that mean?" "It means," Sarah said, "that the Carlyle Group's account is worth, to our parent company Trans Global, an estimated $5 million a year in domestic travel alone, and they were in the final stages of signing a new global contract, an extension, worth, oh God, $30 million. Gary sank into one of the plastic chairs. He looked like he'd been punched. 30 million? Our CEO, David Miller, is in New York right now for that investment summit. The only reason he's here is to have dinner with James Hartson tomorrow night and get that contract signed. That's the only reason." Before Gary could process this, the phone on the desk, a special red line that connected directly to the corporate executive offices downtown, began to ring. It wasn't a normal ring. It was a shrill, piercing shriek. Sarah stared at it like it was a cobra. She had never heard that phone ring. "Answer it," Gary whispered. Terrified, she picked up the receiver, her hand visibly trembling. "Sarah Jenkins, JFK supervisor." A voice exploded from the earpiece, so loud that Gary could hear every word from 5 feet away. It was David Miller, the CIO, and he was not happy. "Jenkins, what in the ever-loving hell did you let happen at Terminal 4? "Mr. Miller, sir, we had an incident." "An incident?" Miller roared. "I just got an email from Linda Bates at Carlyle. Do you know who that is? She's Hartson's assistant. She just informed me, personally, that our entire domestic contract is terminated. Effective immediately. Cancelled. Gone. $5 million, Jenkins. Gone in the last 10 minutes. Sarah was white. She couldn't speak. "And that's not the half of it." Miller's voice was raw with fury. "I've been disinvited from the summit dinner tomorrow. Revoked my invitation. They're pulling the global contract, Jenkins. 30 million. They're citing discriminatory and unsafe practices. They're talking to lawyers." "Sir, it was one employee," Sarah stammered. "Who?" Miller demanded. "Give me the name. I want the name. Now." Sarah looked at Gary. Gary was no longer blustering. He was a small, terrified man. He was shaking his head, his eyes wide, silently begging, "Don't." "The employee's name, sir," Sarah said, her voice dead, "is Gary Wilson. Wilson, he's fired, not suspended. Fired. I want his access codes revoked. I want his badge taken, and I want him escorted off the property by Port Authority police. I don't want him suspended. I want him terminated for cause." "But sir, the union." "Screw the union," Miller shrieked. "I'll fight them in court for a decade. This man just cost us $35 million. He's not just fired from CityLink, he's blacklisted from TransGlobal. He will never drive a bus, a truck, or a forklift for any company I own, ever again. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," Sarah whispered. "And you, Jenkins, you'd better find a way to fix this. You've got 24 hours to write a report that explains how this happened on your watch, and it had better be good." The line clicked dead. Sarah slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. The silence in the small office was total. Gary Wilson stared at the floor. "Fired?" he said to the linoleum. He can't just. 15 years. My pension." "He can," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "And he did. You just cost this company $35 million, Gary. You cost me my career. And for what?" She looked at him with a sudden, pure contempt. "For what? Because you were on a power trip? Because you didn't want to let a black family onto your empty bus? Was it worth it, Gary? Was it worth feeling like a big man for 30 seconds? Gary had no answer. He was trying to do the math. 35 million, he couldn't even comprehend the number. All he knew was that the solid ground beneath his feet had just turned to quicksand. I, he stammered. My wife, my kids. It was a mistake. It was just a mistake. No, Sarah said, standing up and opening the door. A mistake is spilling coffee. A mistake is taking a wrong turn. This was a choice. You looked at that family, you judged them, and you chose to treat them like dirt. She gestured to the 2 Port Authority officers who were already waiting outside, having been summoned by her radio call. Officers, this is Gary Wilson. He's been terminated. Please escort him from the premises. He is not to access any employee areas. The officers stepped forward. Sir, please come with us. Gary looked up, his face ashen. The reality was, finally, crushingly, landing. The job, the pension, the 15 years, gone. It wasn't a suspension, it wasn't a write-up, it was an execution. The next morning, the ballroom at the New York Marriott Marquis was buzzing. The Global Investment Summit was one of the most exclusive events of the year, a gathering of the financial world's titans. David Miller, CEO of TransGlobal Logistics, was not buzzing. He was standing near the coffee station, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, his face a roadmap of stress. He hadn't slept. He'd spent the entire night on the phone with his board, his lawyers, and a string of VPs, all demanding to know how their single most promising contract had evaporated. He'd tried calling James Hartson's cell. It went straight to a "This number does not accept calls from unknown callers" message. He'd emailed Linda Bates. He'd even tried to get a message to him through the peninsula. The response was a digital wall of silence. His 9:15 a.m. keynote, the one he was supposed to share with Hartson, had been rescheduled. His name was scrubbed from the digital agenda. He was a ghost. At 9:15 a.m., a hush fell over the room. James Hartson had arrived. He wasn't in a tracksuit. He was wearing a dark, impeccably tailored Brioni suit, a crisp white shirt, and a simple steel blue tie. He walked with an unhurried, purposeful stride, flanked by 2 of his Carlisle partners. He looked rested, powerful, and completely in charge. David Miller saw his chance. He moved quickly, cutting Hartson off before he could reach the stage. "James!" Miller said, forcing a pained, jovial smile. David Miller, Transglobal. My God, I've been trying to reach you. What a terrible, terrible misunderstanding last night. James Hartson stopped. He looked at David Miller as if trying to place him. His partners stopped with him, their faces impassive. Mr. Miller, James said. His voice was not hostile. It was neutral. Colder than hostile. James, please, Miller said, his voice dropping. I cannot tell you how horrified I am. The employee, Gary Wilson, was terminated immediately, on the spot. What he did was, it was disgusting. It's not our company. It's not who we are. Isn't it? James asked. My family and I were detained for 10 minutes, humiliated in public, by an employee in your uniform, driving your bus. It seems very much like who you are. He was a bad apple, James, a rogue employee, and I promise you, I will personally oversee a top-to-bottom sensitivity retraining for our entire New York staff. James held up his hand, the same gesture from the night before. Stop talking. David, he said, and the use of the first name was a slap. I don't think you understand what happened. This isn't about sensitivity. This is about security and reliability. My firm moves hundreds of executives around the world every day. We place them in your company's care. Last night, your company didn't just fail at customer service. It demonstrated that its employees are untrained, unsupervised, and, in that case, actively hostile. He leaned in, just slightly. What if I hadn't been there? What if he'd put his hands on my wife, or my son? Your rogue employee created a massive liability. The contract is terminated not because my feelings were hurt, Mr. Miller. It's terminated because you failed to provide a safe, reliable service. You are a risk, and I do not invest in risk. Miller's face was crumbling. James, $30 million. We've been partners for a decade. You can't just throw that away over one incident. Watch me, James said. Your company had a choice. Your driver had a choice. He chose wrong. The contract is void. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a speech to give. He and his partners moved past a frozen David Miller, leaving him standing alone by the coffee urn. Every other CEO in the room who had been watching the quiet, intense exchange now understood. Transglobal was out. The blood was in the water. James walked onto the stage, clipped on his microphone, and smiled at the 1,000-person audience. Good morning, he began. Today, I want to talk about accountability. David Miller didn't stay. He walked out of the ballroom, took out his phone, and called his COO. Sell the CityLink division, he said, his voice dead. Just sell it. I don't care what we get. Liquidate it. It's worthless. For Gary Wilson, the 3 days since his firing had been a blur of mounting panic. His first call had been to his union rep. The rep had listened patiently, then sighed. Gary, what am I supposed to do with this? They have you on video. They have the supervisor's report. And, Gary, they have the $35 million contract cancellation. The company is claiming termination for cause, gross misconduct, and fiduciary damage. They're not just firing you. They're building a case to make sure you can't sue them. But it was a mistake. It wasn't, Gary. We've been over your file. The 3 write-ups for customer disputes. The 2 sensitivity training sessions you were forced to attend. The company's argument is that this wasn't an incident. It was a pattern. You're a liability. There's nothing I can do. They're going to fight this, and they'll win. Your pension is gone. Gary had tried to apply for other driving jobs. He went to Shuttle. He went to 2 different private limo companies. He even went to the MTA to try and get a city bus route. The first two laughed him out. The news of the trans-global disaster had spread through the private transport world like fire. He was the $35 million driver. Nobody would touch him. The MTA application was even more brutal. "Mr. Wilson," the HR woman said, "you were terminated for cause from a major transport provider. You're uninsurable. We can't hire you." He was blacklisted, not just by Transglobal, but by the entire industry. His 15 years of experience were now worthless. Worse than worthless, they were a giant red flag. On the fourth day, his wife, Martha, sat him down at their small kitchen table in their modest apartment in Rosedale. The bills were piled up. "Gary, what happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I've been hearing things from Sharon, her husband at the depot. He said you insulted a black family." Gary slammed his fist on the table. "It wasn't like that. They were pushy. They didn't have a ticket. I was just doing my job." "Gary," Martha said, her eyes filling with tears. "Stop. Just stop lying. Sharon's husband saw the video, the one the supervisor has, the one the girl took. He said the bus was empty. He said you called them scammers. Gary, my brother is black. You treat my family that way." "No. Martha, you know me. I'm not like that." "Aren't you?" she asked, her voice cracking. "All those times you'd come home, complaining about those people at the airport, the foreigners who can't speak English, the inner city types. I always told you to stop. I always said it would get you in trouble." She pushed the pile of bills toward him. "The mortgage is due. The car payment is late. Our Marcus's tuition for his music camp is due. How, Gary? How are we going to pay for this if you're blacklisted?" Gary had no answer. He looked at the bills. He looked at his wife's tear-streaked face. He thought of the man in the tracksuit. He thought of the Maybach. He thought of the number 35 million. It all crashed down on him, the weight of his own stupid, pointless arrogance, the arrogance that had cost him everything. He put his head in his hands, right there at the kitchen table, and for the first time, Gary Wilson began to cry. It wasn't a cry of remorse. It was a cry of self-pity, a cry of fear. It was the sound of a small man who had just realized the world was bigger and harsher than he was, and that he had picked a fight with a giant. Martha just watched him, her expression turning from sadness to a cold, hard resolution. She knew, in that moment, that he hadn't learned a thing. He wasn't crying because he was wrong. He was crying because he lost. A week later, the Hartsons were back in their London townhouse. The rainy chill of New York had been replaced by the familiar, damp grey of a London autumn. James was in his study, a glass of 18-year-old Macallan at his elbow, reading a final, confidential after-action report from his legal and operations teams. The fallout had been swift and brutal. Transglobal Logistics' stock had plummeted 12% in a single day of trading when the news of the Carlyle contract loss, which had been leaked almost immediately, hit the financial wires. David Miller, the CEO, had been savaged by his own board of directors. He had survived, but only just. His public apology was a masterpiece of corporate groveling, promising a top-to-bottom, company-wide strategic review of all customer-facing protocols. The CityLink Premier brand, however, did not survive. It was deemed terminally toxic. Transglobal had disbanded the entire division, selling its fleet of Sprinter vans at a massive loss and liquidating its assets. The report noted that this action had resulted in 240 employees being laid off, including supervisors, dispatchers and drivers at JFK and LaGuardia, people who had done nothing wrong. James read that last part with a heavy sigh. It was the unavoidable, unfortunate collateral damage of necessary corporate warfare. One man's poison had infected the entire well, and the well had to be drained. "Well," a voice said from the doorway, "it's officially global." James looked up. It wasn't Eleanor, it was Olivia. She was holding her tablet, her expression a mix of vindication and sober understanding. "What's global?" James asked. "The story," Olivia said, walking in and handing him the device. "Aunt Chloe's friend. She's fast." Eleanor, drawn by their voices, entered the study and stood behind her daughter, reading over James's shoulder. The headline on the screen of the New York Times was stark, dominating the front page of the business section. How one racist incident at JFK cost a CEO $35 million. It was a devastatingly thorough piece of investigative journalism. Olivia's video was embedded, her own steady 16-year-old voice narrating the incident with chilling clarity. But the journalist had gone deeper. She had found other, anonymous CityLink drivers. One was quoted, "Oh, everyone knew Gary. He was a manifest man. If he didn't like your face, you suddenly weren't on the list. He was always ranting about, certain types." Management just looked the other way, because his route was always on time. The reporter had also unearthed 2 other official complaints filed against Gary Wilson in the last year, complaints that Sarah Jenkins's middle management had buried. One was from a family with a disabled child. Another was from an elderly woman who claimed Gary had shouted at her to hurry up or find another ride, and had begun to pull away as she was still trying to board. But the final, crushing part of the article was the epilogue. The journalist had found Gary Wilson. He wasn't driving a bus, he wasn't even driving a taxi. He was working under the table for a no-name, cash-only logistics company in a bleak warehouse district in the Bronx. The reporter had found him loading heavy, unmarked boxes into an unregistered van, his face grey with exhaustion, and his old CityLink uniform jacket stained and torn. The article described him as a broken man who railed against the elites and the rich guys who set him up. It concluded with a single damning quote from Gary himself. How was I supposed to know he was important? He just looked, regular. That's the trap. They dress down, they try to trick you. It's not fair. They set me up. Now look at me. I'm ruined. My pension is gone. My wife, she's leaving me. All for what? Because I was trying to keep my bus orderly? I'm the victim here. James finished the article and slowly set the tablet down. The room was silent. "He's the victim," Olivia said, her voice dripping with disbelief. "After everything he did, after trying to hit me, he still thinks he's the victim." "He still doesn't get it," Eleanor said quietly, her hand on Olivia's shoulder. "He's not sorry he did it, James. He's just sorry it was you." "That," James said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, "is the real tragedy. For him, he learned nothing. He only learned to be afraid." He stood and joined his wife and daughter at the window, looking out over the quiet, lamplit London square. "The world is full of Gary Wilsons," James said, his voice thoughtful. "Men who mistake their tiny bit of authority for real power. They live to build fences, to turn people away. But the world is also full of Sarah Jenkins, who in the end knew what was right. And it's full of Olivias, who aren't afraid to hit record. And it's full of Arthurs who show up and do their job with quiet, unimpeachable dignity." He put one arm around Eleanor and the other around Olivia. "The karma isn't just that he's loading trucks in the Bronx, Liv. The hard karma, the real karma, is that he is exactly where his choices led him. He's a man who has lost everything and still can't understand why. He'll be loading those boxes, bitter and confused for the rest of his life. And we are here. He thought of the look on Gary's face when the Maybach door had shut with that silent, final thunk. The rain, the sheer, uncomprehending panic, the sudden, violent realignment of his universe. And for the first time since the incident, James Hartson allowed himself a small, cold, and deeply satisfied smile. The lesson had been taught. The account was closed. In the end, it wasn't the Maybach that defeated Gary. It was his own prejudice. He picked a fight he couldn't win, not because James Hartson was rich, but because James Hartson was right. Gary's arrogance cost him his job, his pension, and his future, and it took his entire company down with him. This is a powerful reminder that your character is defined by how you treat people you think have no power. Karma isn't always instant, but when it arrives, it's always on time. What did you think of Gary's hard-hitting karma? Have you ever seen someone get instant justice like this? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love stories where arrogance is met with powerful consequences, make sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more real-life drama every week.